Let's imagine an owner of a very successful business that made $2 million a year in profit approached us and wanted to sell us their business. Our first thought should probably be, what makes you want to sell that? Well, here's the challenge. There are some perfectly good, legitimate reasons to sell a successful business, and there's also a few not so good reasons to sell a business. It's very important for us to understand the real reason somebody is selling a business. So in this video, I'm going to discuss why someone would sell a successful business, what those good and bad reasons are, and how to figure out which is which. Hi everybody, I'm Cody Koch. Welcome to the channel. I'm managing partner of Iron Oak Capital, which is a partnership of investors who seek solid returns through the acquisition of strong businesses. If that interests you, check it out at ironoakcapitalpartners.com. Now, in my experience at Iron Oak Capital, it's a very common question I get from new investors is, why would somebody sell a successful business? I had the same question many years ago when somebody actually taught me how to do it. Speaking of that, I would like to thank David C. Barnett. He's a merger acquisition advisor that was able to help me answer this question years ago. This has all proven to be very true, and I've learned more since then. Okay, so over time, I've come to the conclusion that the real reason a seller wants to sell a successful business can often predict the chances of the deal being successful and or the chances of success for the business acquisition itself. Now, business acquisitions are very different than other type of acquisitions. For example, real estate deals, buying or selling a used car, for example. Typically, you do not have any long-term relationship with the seller of those assets. But in business acquisitions, it's very different. You usually have a long-term ongoing relationship with the former owner of this business. And for that reason, we have to be very careful what their real reasoning is, because that reasoning may or may not help us through the process of the acquisition or after the fact and once the business has been acquired. Typically, people assume that owners sell their businesses for financial reasons. In other words, they're trying to get a big payday, so to speak. But actually, when you dig into it, you'll find that that's not the real reason in most cases. And the reason is small and medium-sized businesses, which are the vast majority of business transactions every year, is small and medium-sized business marketplace. You will find that typically it's not worth selling those businesses purely for financial reasons, and I'll explain why that is. The main reason people do not sell small and medium-sized businesses purely for financial reasons is that most small and medium-sized businesses sell for about 1 to 5 times annual free cash flow. So to put that in perspective, let's say you have a business that makes $1 million a year. And let's say that business would sell for maybe 3.5 times in cash flow. So that means the business is worth $3.5 million. Now you have two scenarios. In the first scenario, you could sell your business for $3.5 million. And that's it. That's what you get. 5 years later, you still got that $3.5 million, hopefully. Adjusted for taxes, of course. Scenario 2, on the other hand, let's say you decide to keep the business for another 5 years before you sell it. Well, at the end of those 5 years, you brought in $5 million every year. You brought $1 million in cash flow. At the end of those 5 years, you'd have brought in $5 million, and you'd still have a business worth $3.5 million at the end of it. So in scenario 1, you brought in $3.5 million. Scenario 2, you brought in $8.5 million. That's the difference. That's a major reason why many sellers do not want to sell their businesses purely for financial reasons. If you're enjoying this video, please click that like button and subscribe. It lets me know that you guys are enjoying these videos and that I should produce more like it. Okay, so now let's get into some real personal reasons, the real reasons people typically sell their successful businesses. And the first one is retirement. One thing you're going to learn is that retirement is actually not a terribly motivating reason in many cases. A lot of business owners do not like to retire. And typically what you'll find is retirement has to be adjusted by age. If a seller is typically in their 50s or 60s, a lot of the time retirement, they may say retirement, but in many cases it's more like a spouse wanting them to retire. And often the business seller is not really that motivated to retire. On the other hand, you'll often see retirement if somebody's in their 70s or even 80s and they say retirement, typically that's the real reason because they're motivated, they're slowing down, they're getting tired. So the next significant personal reason would be relocation. So maybe they've got other opportunities in another region. Maybe their spouse has moved someplace for a job, or maybe they have another business someplace else. Maybe they want to move to a new region for tax reasons or move to a new country. Maybe they want to move to a vacation home, who knows? But relocation is often a very good reason that someone may want to sell a business. Next is illness. Now, unfortunately, illness is becoming more common, especially in the United States. A wide variety of really bad diseases such as Parkinson's disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, and so forth are becoming more and more common in the United States, and so these often induce people to have to sell their businesses early. Of course, there's other bad diseases such as cancer. There's a wide variety of autoimmune diseases, which are incredibly common in the United States, and so forth. So illnesses are kind of self-explanatory. Many sellers who get hit with illnesses are highly motivated for obvious reasons. They need to get their business sold before something, unfortunately, can happen to them. The next reason would be death. So in this case, the owner has passed away. Typically, their family members have inherited it or somebody's inherited the business. In a lot of cases, they really do not have the experience they need in order to manage these businesses, so they are better off in their cases simply selling them. Next is divorce. Now, divorce is somewhat self-explanatory. The business owners are going their separate ways, and in many cases, that requires somebody to sell their ownership to either one another or they sell it to a third party. So divorce can be a very common motivator to get out from underneath a business. Next is business partnership breakups. So you can have a partnership, you can have shareholders in a business, and sometimes those partners or the shareholders stop getting along with each other for a wide variety of reasons. They want to go in different directions, they want to do different things. And so for that reason, business partnership breakups absolutely lead a lot of businesses to be sold. Next is we have unrelated bankruptcies. Now, I have seen this in a couple of occasions in which somebody owns maybe 5 or 10 businesses, and all of a sudden one of their businesses that they own starts to get in a lot of trouble. And maybe they owe a lot of debt on that business. Maybe they've signed a lot of personal guarantees or something like that. Well, unfortunately, because of that, and one business starts to decline very heavily, the banks may force this individual to then sell their ownership in the other 9 businesses they own. And so unrelated bankruptcies occasionally do happen. It may have nothing to do with the business that's being sold. It has something to do with a totally unrelated business. In many cases, banks can force people to sell their assets in order to raise the capital to pay the bank back for an unrelated business debt. Next is boredom. Now, this one, a lot of business buyers are most skeptical of boredom. And the reason is because they go and they meet somebody who's making, let's say, $1 million a year in profit in a business, and they think, why are you bored with that? Why would you want to sell it? But actually, boredom is far more common than people realize. And so kind of explain this. Imagine you've owned a business for 20 years, and every year, over those 20 years, it's made $1 million a year in profit. So over those 20 years, you probably now have a net worth that's close to maybe $20 million. So if you keep the business for a whole other year, you add another $1 million maybe to your net worth, not adjusted for taxes, of course. That can only really increase your net worth by maybe 5%, which is relatively a small amount. And if you're bored, you've been doing something for 20 years, you get sick and tired of it, it kind of doesn't really matter how much more money you're going to bring in, especially since it represents a relatively small chunk of your net worth. So you get bored. You're bored, you're wanting to move on, you want to do other things. In fact, I've seen a number of occasions which somebody sells their business to simply go and run a charitable organization, or give some of their money away, or go get a job, even in some cases. Other times they want to do some other startup. I've heard of stories in which somebody sold a business that was making a few $1 million a year to simply start a business that would never make more than $50,000 a year, because that seller had a much bigger passion at that point in their life for this other type of business. So boredom is very common, happens all the time. Now, sellers may not tell us that they're bored. That doesn't sound so good in negotiations. A lot of the time they'll give you other reasons, like I have other business interests, I want to maybe retire or something like that, but a lot of the time they will not necessarily mention boredom. Of course, we do need to be a little bit careful about is, are they bored because the business is falling apart and they're frustrated and they're sick and tired of it? We'll talk about how to figure that out in just a second. So next is fatigue and burnout. Now, this happens a lot with people who are very into their businesses. They are very involved in the day-to-day management, or maybe they have a lot of problems letting go, delegating, or automating parts of the business. So people get into the business and they work 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week for weeks and weeks and months on end, never really getting a vacation. A lot of times they will eventually burn out and just be exhausted. Maybe they develop an illness, unfortunately, from working that hard. Things like that. So fatigue and burnout is also very common. Now, in this case, we have to be careful. If we're going to go acquiring a business like that, we need to absolutely make sure we can automate and delegate sufficiently this business so that we do not become fatigued and burned out ourselves. And of course, once again, you got to be careful with fatigue and burnout. It could be they're fatigued and burnout simply because the business is in the process of failing or declining. And again, we'll talk about in just a second and how to figure out which is which. Next is other business interests. This can be really tricky in various ways in my experience. It could be that they're bored and they say other business interest. It could be that they're fatigued and burned out and they say other business interest. It could be that they have another business they're much more interested in that's making a lot more money at the time. Or maybe that's one reason they need to relocate, is they have some other career or business or something that's causing them to have to sell their current business. I would generally say other business interest isn't entirely a clear story and generally has to be dug into a little bit deeper to really be confident what's really going on. But there is a point here that I kind of warn everybody about. I have seen cases where people will do what I call build and flips. So they will build a business and they will flip it. And I've actually seen a number of occasions in the e-commerce space in which people will launch new products. They will let those products start to sell really well over a course of a year or two, and then they will go ahead and sell that entire product line to somebody who is trying to buy a business in the e-commerce space. Now, selling product lines is not the same thing as selling a whole business, a going concern business. Those are two different processes. I won't go into that. But the point of the matter is that that person who sold that product line would then turn right around and launch several more product lines. And as those product lines mature a little bit, they'll sell those each off as whole going concern businesses. The problem with that is a going concern business typically sells at a much higher price than individual product lines. And many new buyers who don't know any better will come in and pay full ongoing business prices for otherwise product lines. And so the issue is they end up dramatically overpaying. And this is the reason that some of these build and flippers will build these businesses up and then sell off pieces of these businesses over time, because they found it actually makes way more money than actually keeping the product lines and selling through them over time, because product lines have a life expectancy that is relatively short. I won't go in a whole lot more detail than that, other than to just say I have seen cases cases like that in the past. And for that reason, I'm extra careful with reasons like other business interests. Okay, so the next reason would be undercapitalized. Now, this one is interesting to me. This is where somebody has started a business or they've grown a business pretty well, but it's simply getting too large for them and they want to sell it because they do not have the skill set, or for whatever reason they think it's getting too big for their capabilities and their skills and they want to sell it. They do not have the capital to grow it any further, or whatever the case may be. Now, it's a little tricky because a lot of sellers who try to sell these kind of businesses are going to try to claim that, hey, we got all this growth potential, and they usually want a really high price for their businesses. It's a little tricky. It's as if they're trying to justify a really high price or something, and they simply say, we're undercapitalized. We need somebody who's bigger, who can bring a lot more money to the table in order for us to grow this. Now, I'm a little skeptical of this personally. I often wonder if there's an unrelated reason that they're doing that, or if they're just trying to get a really high price for the business, get everybody excited about the reason they're selling. It often doesn't give me the confidence I need to go ahead and acquire a business like that. So here's another reason that's actually not, what in my opinion, that legitimate, but it is financial in nature, in which a business had a recent massive spike up in profitability that's temporary, that will not last in the long run. I have seen this many times in recent years because of certain upheavals in the economy allowing people to see big spikes in their profitability. I do not consider this to be a very legitimate reason to sell a business simply because it's not truly a going concern at that profitability level. I actually kind of think this is a little bit dishonest. The last reason is not such a good reason, and that is that the business is declining or about to fail. Now, I've definitely seen this on a number of occasions. All buyers fear this, and for very good reason. So it's somewhat self-explanatory. The business is declining or failing in some way, shape, or form. They're frustrated, they're sick and tired of it, and they're just going to try to get out from underneath it. In some cases, they try to sell it for a really high price. I've definitely seen that many times, but those people very, very rarely sell their businesses. Much more common is that they'll actually sell their businesses for liquidation value of the assets. And of course, this is the biggest concern for a lot of buyers like me, for example. We really do not want a seller to be hiding something from us that could get us in a lot of trouble after we acquire a business. Okay, so those are the main reasons that people sell their business. There's other reasons, of course, but those are the main reasons. Now, let's talk about how we actually can tell the difference between a legitimate reason and a not so legitimate reason. So one great way to figure out which of these reasons is the real reason somebody wants to sell a business is to look at the financial statements. Now, the financial statements tell a story. As long as those financial statements are accurate, which we verify through due diligence, the financial statements tell us a big chunk of the story. And in many cases, they will actually reveal to us the real reason a seller is wanting to sell a business. For example, you may see a case where the business's sales and profits are declining, and then when you talk to the seller simply says they're fatigued and burned out. Well, that's usually because the business is declining. On other occasions, you may see the business has been steadily rising over many years, doesn't bob or move around very much, just a steady rise over many, many years, and the seller tells you they're bored. The seller says they have other business interests, okay? You ask what those business interests are, and they're totally legitimate, they make a lot of sense, they have nothing to do with the business you're trying to sell, for example, then that's probably a good, fair deal to get involved in. So another example would be something in my own personal experience. I once was in a negotiation with a chain of grocery stores, and in the financial statements, there had been a significant spike up in recent years in profitability in this particular grocery store chain. Once discussing with the seller basically said he was interested in retirement. He was a little bit on the young side. He was still in his 60s, which is a little unusual for somebody who'd be enjoying big spikes in profitability. So once I dug deeper into the numbers, however, I discovered that their cost of goods sold had suddenly collapsed that year for a couple of years in a row, and it turns out those are one-off thing that was never to return again. The real reason the seller was selling the business is because he was trying to base his price multiples of the business selling on this big spike in profitability. And of course, shortly after, it started to decline quite dramatically to go back to more normal levels for that particular business. The next major thing we do is we get to know the seller. So simply spending a lot of time with the seller, having conversations with them. That could be phone calls, in-person meetings, online video meetings, just getting to know them very well, spending enough time with them, learning the business, learning about their lives, and we will get a much better picture of the real reasons for them selling. Going through this process and understanding all of this opens up a wide variety of doors to success. It really lowers our risk and gives us a wide variety of opportunities in the future. If this video was interesting, please like and subscribe. But also, I recommend checking out one of these other videos. They've been specially curated just for you, something you're likely to be very interested in. And that's it for me today, everybody. Thank you for watching.